What's up everybody, Matt Maran here for another car review. This is of course the 2021 Volkswagen ID.4. So this is the first edition of the ID.4, and so after the first edition this will basically be pretty similar to what you get in a Pro S version of the ID.4. So this is the first of this brand new crop of Volkswagen electric vehicles. So this is the first one. They wanted to start off with the most mainstream appeal of them all with a mid-sized family crossover vehicle here. So as far as the sizing of this vehicle, it's actually almost identical with its dimensions to like a Toyota RAV4. So very common, type of shape and size and all that. Should be very comfortable for a lot of people that are looking for a crossover and want to venture into something electric here. And so I think the ID.4 does a really good job of feeling a little more conventional. Now it still has some higher tech features to it. So you have these very cool LED headlights here, and these are the adaptive headlights in these higher trims, and so you'll see the little notches there in the side of them, and they do turn in corners and things like that. You also will see that little illuminated LED strip that goes all the way up to the Volkswagen emblem, which is a cool touch. This one also has the white badges here for the first edition. So I think it looks distinctive and unique. It doesn't look like any other normal Volkswagen, but I think that it's not quite as wild looking as most of the other electric stuff you get these days. It is a little more bold and in your face, or just a little bit different to stand out. This kind of is okay blending in a little bit more, and I think a lot of people will probably appreciate that, especially if you're, again, just going for a normal crossover. One thing that is pretty distinctive here, coming down to the sides, are these 20-inch wheels, which are pretty large compared to most of the average crossovers that get 18 or 19-inch wheels maybe. To go up to 20s here makes a pretty bold statement, but I think they really fill in the wheel wells nicely and fit with the design of this vehicle. Other things coming down to the side, you'll see the little first edition badge here, and I really love this silver accent you have all through the top of the roofline here. It's a really nice touch, and you even have the little gloss black plastic parts as well. It kind of just blends very nicely. You'll see you also have these flush door handles, and they don't actually pull up. They're just fixed, and kind of a cool little touch there. And then going out to the back, you'll see the full width taillights here, which are a very cool touch, and that is one thing that does help this to stand out and feel a little more modern than a lot of the other vehicles in this segment of normal crossovers that don't look quite as bold with that rear taillight and stuff. And it's nice and streamlined since you don't have any kind of exhaust tips or anything to worry about, and just a nice rounded kind of back end here. And so overall, I think the ID.4 from every angle is unique, but also conservative, and I think it really strikes a nice blend of those two things. All right, so let's start up and go for a drive. The ID.4 has this really cool new Volkswagen key. It's like really glossy, has a nice weight to it. I mean, the whole thing is glossy. It's just really cool. I've never really seen a fully glossy key like this before. It's very futuristic, and yeah, I just really like it. So, but the interesting thing with the ID.4 here is that you just leave the key in your pocket. It is keyless access and all that kind of stuff. And then whenever you actually just sit down in the ID.4, it's already turned on and ready to go. So it usually is pretty intelligent about figuring out that you're actually in the car, and I think it has a sensor in the seat or something. But there is a start button if the car does get confused, so you can manually start it up and turn it off. But anyway, usually just you hop in here. It's very Tesla-like, where you just push the brake pedal, and that gets everything actually up and ready to go, and then you just pop it into drive and start moving. Also, if you're curious to hear about the interior in the ID.4, my wife and I actually just did a full in-depth interior review on this vehicle, so I'll link that above. You can go watch that if you want to hear all our thoughts on this interior. Overall, it is very, very different from any other Volkswagen, really, and from most other vehicles that you're used to. It's very, very few buttons in this interior, lots of capacitive touch stuff. It's trying to be really futuristic, but there's also some stuff that's kind of frustrating and tricky to use compared to just a normal car, and there are just some odd choices in this interior. So definitely go watch that interior review if you're considering one of these, because it's something that I think some people might be kind of fascinated with, but other people might think it's a little more trouble than it's worth. All right, so setting off here in the 2021 Volkswagen ID.4. So first thing that you notice, well, there's a lot to take in. I guess the first thing when you first sit down in here is the visibility in the ID.4, which is really interesting. So it's overall really good. You have a nice large windshield. It's really slanted a lot, so you have a lot of dashboard in front of you. So it kind of feels almost like minivan-like to me, just looking forward, because this dashboard is just so long and the windshield has such an angle to it. It's kind of interesting. The A-pillar is a little bit thick towards the base, and so depending on the angle angle of intersections and stuff, and just the way the roads are set up. There was one time where that actually was kind of getting in the way, but overall, I mean, you have the mirror off onto the door, and you do have that little A-pillar window, so hopefully it won't be too bad most of the time. I'll continue to check for that as I'm driving this around for the week. But really nice large side windows. View out of the back is also pretty good. The window's a little bit small, but not too bad. And so as far as visibility goes, it's really easy to see around. You do have a backup camera here, but you don't have a 360 camera, which is kind of surprising, because even like a premium trim of a Mustang Mach-E gives you a 360 camera. You don't have anything like that here in this. But other things to note, of course, it's electric, so you're going to notice that right off the bat, where it's nice and quiet, especially above 20 miles per hour. Below 20 miles per hour, it makes these humming sounds, which is of course to alert pedestrians and stuff like that, so that people see you coming and aren't too surprised. But that's really the only noise it makes, and I think it's a really cool kind of futuristic noise, so I do like that. Other things here, so brakes have a lot of travel to them. They don't feel too weird though. Some other electric vehicles, it's a little weird or touchy with the brakes. This, it's mostly consistent, but it's not perfect. There is also this B mode, which Volkswagen claims gives you one pedal driving, but it's not enough aggression with the regenerative braking, so it doesn't actually come to a stop in a reasonable amount of time, at least. So you're still going to have to use the brake pedal even with that B mode on, but that will stop the car from like coasting, things like that, versus in drive it'll inch up and coast and all that, just like a normal automatic transmission gasoline powered vehicle. So they wanted to keep it familiar for people. Again, they're trying to convert people that are coming from gas engine vehicles more so, I think, than trying to make electric car fans happy. But at least you have the B mode there for a little bit of regen, at least, because whenever you're just in drive, it almost feels like you're wasting energy because it's not recapturing any of that energy, really. But yeah, so throttle response though is very nice and immediate. Even here in the eco mode, it responds very quickly, and you have the typical electric response where it's immediate and you get instant jolts of power. But it's nicely smoothed over, so it's not really violent or anything like some of the others can be, at least in their more aggressive modes. But yeah, it's just a really nice thing to cruise around in. Very soft, comfortable ride, and of course very quiet. Not only because you don't have an engine, but it's also just pretty quiet and well insulated in here. But we'll go ahead and put it up into the sport driving mode, and let's turn down onto this back road here and see how it does. And here we go. All right, pretty instant jolt, kind of pushes you back in your seat a good bit. And gets up and moves really nicely, but all you're hearing is wind noise and how it increases. That's all you hear. If you listen really, really closely, you might be able to hear a tiny bit of an electric motor, but it's basically totally silent. So it's kind of wild. You actually don't really hear much tire noise either, so they did a really good job of making this thing feel really nice and quiet, and it gives a really luxurious feeling. But anyway, as far as the power goes, so this first edition, and currently here in July of 2021, all versions of the ID.4 are rear-wheel drive only. An all-wheel drive version is coming that'll have dual motors and more power, but this one is just rear-wheel drive, a rear motor, does 201 horsepower, 229 pound-feet of torque, and that gives it about a 7.6 seconds 0 to 60 time. So I'd say it feels maybe a little bit quicker than that. I don't know if it feels that slow, but it's very punchy still whenever you tip in, especially here in sport mode. It really, wants to take off and go pretty quickly. For someone who is used to electric vehicles, I've tested a few of them here now. It's about what you're expecting, but it's not going to be as impressive as basically most of the other newer EVs out there these days that have a lot more punch to them. Even a base Mustang Mach-E is a good bit faster than this. But anyway, other things here. Again, now we're on a pretty rough road. This road usually generates a lot of road noise in most of my other reviews and other vehicles. And in this, I mean, you hear a little bit, but it is a good bit quieter than when you're going to get in most other vehicles. Not only in this segment, but in most segments. It's really pretty impressive, especially on these 20-inch wheels, that not only is it so quiet on these huge 20-inch wheels, but it's also so smooth and soft for the ride. I mean, I've already hit a few potholes already, and it just really glides over them. It is very, almost luxurious, I have to say, with the ride here. But anyway, coming up some corners here, and let's see how the ID.4 handles them. This thing weighs almost 4,700 pounds, 4,698. So here we go, let's see. Okay, so it's not bad. Obviously, you're going to have a very low center of gravity because you have all those batteries in the floor, and so that's going to, help this to not feel like it's top heavy or anything. Now they do, have the suspension tuned to be a little bit on the softer side, since this is just a family crossover, nothing that's supposed to be sporty. but it's honestly, it feels pretty good. I'd say that yeah, it's a nice blend of, I'd say it probably handles better than most family crossovers. I can probably give it that. It feels flatter than a RAV4 or a CRV or something like that for sure. And yes, it's maybe 1,000 pounds or so heavier than those vehicles. I don't think you really feel 1,000 pounds heavier. Maybe you feel 200 or 300 pounds of extra weight, at least from my driver's seat impressions here. But it doesn't feel like you're piloting something that weighs as much as a Hummer or something. I mean, it doesn't feel that heavy. So, I mean, it feels pretty good. I gotta say too, the steering has a pretty nice feel to it. I mean, it's just the weighting is nice. Obviously, it's pretty numb and dead. You don't really feel much through the wheel, but it feels precise, and I do like. I think it's kind of a pretty happy medium as far as the steering weight here. I believe it is a little bit heavier in sport mode, but it's mostly just sharpening up that throttle response there in that sport mode. But here's some potholes, and I was going a little bit slower because I had some traffic in front of me. But I mean, it's impressive how much this thing soaks them up. And also, this is rear-wheel drive, so, if you're an enthusiast, you might be like, oh man, it's going to start feeling like it wants to slide around or something like that, like a rear-wheel drive sports car would. And they have everything dialed in with the stability control and stuff that, even whenever I tried to push it coming out of that one corner earlier, it was totally planted, did not have any kind of rear-wheel drive tendencies or anything. I think, with this, they're not trying to make it feel sporty with the rear-wheel drive thing. They just, it's just the cheaper one, it's two-wheel drive and just so happens to be in the rear. So I think they try to tune out, any kind of, sporty handling characteristics as far as that rear motor, but it does. I mean, I'm totally happy with the power. I think for the average person, especially someone coming out of a gas vehicle, you hop into this, you're going to be like, wow, this thing feels like a rocket ship, because you have that instant response of that power, and that's going to feel, pretty exciting, especially, if you haven't experienced something like a crazy Tesla or even the Mustang Mach-E or something like that, which does give you a good bit more performance. And as I'm turning around, one cool thing though with the rear-wheel drive version is that you have insane amounts of steering you can do. I mean, the turning radius in this thing is smaller than anything else in this segment by a long shot, and so if you often find yourself navigating in tight areas, that might sell this alone, because it has a turning radius tighter than anything else I've ever encountered, I think ever. And I'll try another acceleration here, wheel turn. Yeah, there's no kind of drama. It just sticks and goes. So they did a very good job of putting the power to the ground. I mean, I'm not wanting this thing to be sliding around or anything, but I'm just kind of shocked that it's rear-wheel drive, 229 pound-feet of torque that are instant, and there is no kind of wiggle or anything for that back end. So that's good if you're someone who's not on the sporty side. This will feel nice and confident and safe as long as you're not encountering any kind of rain or snow. If you're someone who encounters bad weather, I would wait for the all-wheel drive version for sure. The all-wheel drive version also gives you an extra 100 horsepower, so it's going to be around 300 horsepower compared to the 200 horsepower here in this. So that should address the power complaints. If there's some people that want more power, that'll give you that, and you'll also have that all-wheel drive sure-footedness that most people buying a crossover want. Most crossover buyers do not want rear-wheel drive, so we'll see if that hinders the sales of this rear-wheel drive version, but at least they do have an all-wheel drive version coming, and I'm sure that'll be a lot more popular. But yeah, I think even in the normal drive mode though, it is nice how it kind of will inch up and stuff. So again, it's a very normal kind of driving experience aside from that immediate power. The other thing though to mention here about this electric vehicle, it's very important if you're buying an electric vehicle, is the battery size, the recharge times, range, all that kind of stuff. So this has a 77 kilowatt hour battery, and so it does 250 miles of range. But the interesting thing with that is that even whenever you go into the car's settings, it says that it recommends you only charge up to 80%. So really, unless you don't care about the health of your battery, this is the same thing that Tesla does, right? Where Tesla will give you this huge mileage claim, but then tell you, oh, but actually you shouldn't let it get below 10%, and you also shouldn't let it get below 80 or 90%, or above 80 or 90%. And so that gives you a realistic range that's a lot less. But I just wanted to point that out, that if you are trying to keep the battery in good health, it'll be realistically, in the low 200s, not 250. But as far as recharge times though, that is pretty good too. If you do a DC fast charger, it'll do from 5% to 80% in just 38 minutes. So if you are trying to do some type of road trip or something like that, you stop for a bite to eat or something like that, you can get right back to that 80% mark. Now we'll slow down a good bit beyond that. So that's another case where the whole usable range is great, but for you to actually max it out to full 250, 50, you can do that at your house before you leave for a trip, but when you're on the road, you're not going to want to go beyond that 80%. So again, that realistic range is going to be maybe closer to 200 instead of 250 if you are just zapping it from 5% to 80% on road trips. You're going to have a less effective range there than that top 250 number. It's also worth noting about that range too that Car and Driver did a cold weather highway test, and they only managed to get 190 miles of even just cruising on the highway, again, in cold weather. So that is another thing, is in cold weather, this doesn't have any kind of heat pump or anything, so this is going to drop with the range in cold weather, and also just any kind of other climate. If you're in a climate where you have to blast the AC all the time, that's going to lower your results and stuff. So that 250 is really an ideal number, and that is another thing to keep in mind about this. So there's lots of caveats, as far as that actual range goes, so I wouldn't bank on anything much beyond 200 if you're really trying to play it safe and plan out a road trip or something like that. But a lot of those challenges are challenges that all electric cars face for the most part, and so it is nice how whenever you do get one of these ID.4s, you get 3 years of free charging on the Electrify America network, and so that's the network that Volkswagen has been funding heavily. And so with that, you're going to have a pretty good amount of charging locations and a good amount of places to charge up, and it's pretty much on par with Tesla's supercharging network. Now, is it as reliable as Tesla's supercharging network, or in the right kind of spots like Tesla's supercharging network often is? From the experiences I've seen so far, it doesn't seem to always be quite as reliable, but that is something that will continue to improve. They're continuing to roll out new chargers all the time, and so here in the middle of 2021, that's something that certainly could use improvement, but it's not bad. But I think Tesla still is probably the king as far as charging goes when you're on a road trip. All right, so now we're out on the highway here in the ID.4, and one thing that I forgot to mention earlier is the driver assistance tech. So this has all the usual driver assistance tech, so it has lane keeping assist and the automatic emergency braking, adaptive cruise control, all those types of things here in this, and it's great to have all that stuff. But one thing is, it won't let you turn any of that stuff off while you're driving. You have to be stopped in order to turn that stuff off, and it automatically defaults to putting on the lane keeping assist system every single time you get in this car to start driving. I've turned it off, and when I come back to the car, it's back on again. So every single time you get in this car, you're going to have to remember to go in and turn that off if you don't like this thing trying to steer for you constantly. And it doesn't intervene too much, but if you are getting a little bit close to the shoulder, you will feel it try and nudge the steering wheel. Thankfully, it doesn't beep at you or anything. It's just the nudging of the wheel, but it's still kind of annoying that it does that. And also, it's kind of hit or miss, because sometimes it will let me actually go over the lines before it starts alerting me. But anyway, just one thing to note there, I do really wish that you could at least have that stuff turned off permanently, but unfortunately that's not the case. But we'll go ahead and put on the adaptive cruise control systems, all these capacitive touch buttons here on the wheel. And it's interesting too, because you can do a harder tap to do going up and down for your speeds, and then an extra hard tap will go 5 more higher. So it's kind of this interesting thing trying to play around with it. It can be a little bit distracting trying to get it just right with your pressure on your finger for the buttons here. But anyway, so I have all that stuff turned on. I'm going to turn the travel assist on, which is where it does more active steering assist for you and actually tries to center you in the lane, not just keep you from leaving the lane. So I have that on. We're cruising here in some rush hour traffic, but everyone seems to be doing about the speed limit here. And on this straight part of the road here, it's totally fine. Even with the glaring of the sun here, it seems to be picking up the road lines pretty reliably. And it is nice how it will actually visualize here on the little gauge cluster, that it sees a car in front of you there, so that you know that it's recognizing that and picking that up. And you can also change the distances for all that kind of stuff to give you a little bit of a shorter following distance, but it still is going to leave enough of a gap that someone could cut in if they really wanted to. But anyway, I'm just hovering my hand on the wheel here, letting it do the steering, and it's doing pretty good. It doesn't feel too nervous or anything, feels pretty confident. Volkswagen does a pretty good job with their steering assist and their adaptive cruise systems and a few of the others that I've tested in the past. So I wasn't expecting to be really let down here, but it's just always curious. These systems, they're not always consistent, but in this one it seems to be pretty consistent here, and it's steering well around these corners that are fairly gentle, but a little tighter than you might see in a lot of other states in the country. And yeah, it's doing a pretty good job. And so yeah, I'm going to continue to drive this vehicle around all over the place. I'll test that out more. I'll also come back and give you guys my final real world efficiency numbers for how well the batteries performed and the electric motors and how efficient it is, as well as my thoughts on anything else I noticed during the week here, and my thoughts on its pricing and its competitors and how it all measures up against all of those. All right, so I've been driving the ID.4 for a week now, and I've put about 90 miles on it in that time. So mostly just around town driving, and so that's why it's hasn't been a ton of mileage here. But I did end up putting about 4 hours of seat time in this vehicle during my week, and so I really enjoyed it. Now, I think the thing that struck me about the ID.4 is that it's good, but it didn't leave an impact on me, and it hasn't made me kind of fall in love with it a little bit, like how I actually felt about the Mach-E. I went into the Mach-E being like, I don't know about this, and then it really, I just really ended up liking it by the end of the week. This, it's fine, it just leaves me feeling a little colder than the Mach-E, and I think it's good. I think part of it is maybe just the fact that it's a little bit slower, but I mean, there's nothing really wrong with the ID.4 driving experience. It drives totally fine, and I think for most people it'll be totally good. So this kind of falls in the same kind of camp as most other normal crossover SUVs. There's nothing really wrong with most of them. They're just not incredibly exciting either. Obviously, this is a little bit more exciting than your average crossover SUV is, I think, but there's a few little tidbits here and there that make it exciting. Like some of the stuff I really appreciated was the ambient lighting at night. So you have really cool, multicolored lights here that go across the dashboard, and there's also a cool little strip of LEDs that lights up whenever you put the car in gear, or whenever you're charging the car. It lights up green, and it gives you a huge long progress bar essentially for your charge. And so there's a couple cool little touches like that, but then the rest of it, I do enjoy the sounds and stuff you get whenever you're under 20 miles an hour. It has some cool stuff to it. I don't know, it's not exciting me. I don't get a thrill driving this like I kind of did with the Mach-E, but I mean, it's incredibly smooth, it's incredibly comfortable, quiet. It'd be a great just running errands, just doing your normal life stuff. If you don't want something that really gives you a bunch of fizz, then this is still going to be totally fine. And I think, especially if you are, again, not used to electric vehicles, this could give you a new and exciting experience. It just, I think, again, whenever you're comparing it, which is the whole point of reviews, is to compare it and see how it matches up with everything else that you can get for basically the same money. That's where I think the ID.4 falls just a little bit short. So talking about charging, I did plug this vehicle in one night and charge it overnight in my garage. And over about 14 and a half hours of charging on just a normal house current plug, I ended up getting about 44 miles of range, although the estimate is it's weird. It's different on the infotainment screen than it is on the gauge pod here. So I got anywhere between 44 and 54 miles of range over those 14 and a half hours. Obviously, if you're not driving more than 50 miles a day, that's totally fine, and you can have it plugged in, during the weekend whenever you're not driving around as much and things like that, and make that up, and it'd be totally fine. But of course, you do have the option of going up to a 240 volt charge in your house, or you're going to go to the Electrified American network or any other charger and get a quicker charge if you're needing that quicker than what you get from your house. But I think even just doing the regular plug, it's totally fine, again, unless you're doing tons of miles. But it's interesting that even though this is less powerful than the Mach-E, the efficiency numbers for this are actually lower than what they are for the Mach-E, which actually has more horsepower with its rear-wheel drive base form, which this kind of competes with. And so as far as the MPGe numbers, that's how the EPA rates these, even though it's kind of an odd metric. That's kind of what is being used to compare these against the others. So this vehicle is rated at 104 MPGe in the city, 89 on the highway, and 97 combined. And so when you look at, again, a more powerful rear-wheel drive Mach-E, those are rated to do one higher in the city, not a big difference, but it's 4 higher on the highway, and combined it gets 100 MPGe versus the 97 in this. And that's a vehicle that's faster, that might be a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter, so maybe that's part of why you get the better efficiency. Because as far as the motors go, this is actually telling me, according to the onboard computer, I'm getting 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour, and in the Mach-E I was averaging 3.1 miles per kilowatt hour. And by the way, the 3.1 that I was getting in the Mach-E was for my all-wheel drive version, which had dual motors, way more power, and I was still only 0.6 off from this rear-wheel drive. If I did test a rear-wheel drive Mach-E, I'm sure it would probably be even higher for the efficiency. Another thing is the driver assistance stuff here in the ID.4 also kind of annoyed me, because like I mentioned, you have to actually go in and turn off the lane keeping assist system every time you get in this vehicle, and there was a lot of times where I just forgot to do it. I mean, especially if you're in a hurry and stuff, the last thing you're thinking about is, oh, let me poke through this infotainment software to turn this off, because it's not just one button press, unfortunately. You got to dive into a menu to turn that off. And so, you know, I didn't have it turned off, and I swear this thing, it like just wants to steer itself. It doesn't even want me to steer, because when I'm like actually steering fine, it just depends on the road. But there's some roads where it's like actually like I'm not even getting close to the line, and it's still like taking over my steering for me and like doing aggressive steering. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm steering the car. It senses my hands on the wheel. It's not like I just passed out at the wheel. So why this thing is so desperately trying to steer me when I'm not even close to the lines, I don't know. And the fact that it doesn't remember you want it turned off, that would kind of annoy me on a daily basis, until you get into a habit of every single day sitting here for 30 seconds, poking through this menu and turning that stuff off. Another thing that I preferred in the Mach-E over this is the one pedal driving in this. So, you know, they call it one pedal here in this, but it really still isn't, because I was still having to use the brake pedal every time I was using that one pedal mode. And so, you know, because it wasn't really useful, I just decided to just give up on the whole regenerative braking thing and just put it in the normal drive mode and just drove it like a normal, you know, SUV, and had it creep up and, you know, not recoup as much of the energy whenever I was slowing down. And it just was kind of unfortunate that, you know, it just isn't a very well done one pedal mode, versus in the Mach-E you could truly drive that car with one pedal, and it was really easy. It was actually more intuitive to use, in my opinion, than even like stuff like the Teslas and all that. So I really enjoyed the one pedal in the Mach-E, and this not so much. I don't want to be too harsh on the ID.4 either, because just because it's not as good as a Mach-E, in my opinion, doesn't mean that it's a bad electric crossover by any means. I think compared to a lot of the other stuff in this segment that's very similar in pricing, that's smaller, more cramped, that's you know, just does very similar range and stuff. I mean, I'm talking about the Chevy Bolts and the, you know, Hyundai Kona electric and stuff like that, which are all way smaller, way more cramped. This is going to make a lot of sense, you know, for all those people who just, you know, were like, well, I don't want to drive a Nissan Leaf, so they just weren't into electric cars. I think this is going to make a whole lot more sense if you're someone who wants an electric car that isn't a Tesla. You know, I think that this is great. The last thing is pricing here in the ID.4. And that's one area where, you know, they priced it well. This one starts at just over $41,000 for the ID.4. And then this one, as tested, is just over $45,000. And so, you know, at $45,000, again, this is rear-wheel drive, which I still am not sure how many people, at least people that see weather, are going to go for this rear-wheel drive one at all. But if you are curious about it, I mean, yeah, $45,000 is good, and, you know, that is a tiny bit cheaper than what you get with a rear-wheel drive Mach-E. But, you know, the difference is, you know, for a comparable Mach-E, you're really only talking about maybe $2,000 more expensive, and you get more power, you get a bigger touchscreen in the Mach-E, you get a front trunk in the Mach-E, which you don't get here in this. You have less cargo space, I think, overall in this versus the Mach-E, although it's split up. I think this might have a slightly bigger hatch than the Mach-E. When you factor in that front trunk, I think, you know, it comes out to be pretty close to even. The rear seat's probably a little bit more spacious here in this. We go over all the details again in that interior review, but it's really close. I mean, the Mach-E is still a great family vehicle, so you know, that's just another area where I just wish it was maybe a little bit cheaper, but it still does, you know, very well undercut stuff like, you know, the Tesla Model Y, which is way more expensive. I know for me personally, who loves Apple CarPlay, you know, and likes having gauges in front of me, I probably wouldn't consider a Tesla, and I would consider stuff like the ID.4 and the Mach-E for that reason alone, aside from everything else. And so that's one other really great thing about the ID.4, that if a Tesla's a little too weird for you, this will have enough of that familiarity, but still give you that high-tech, futuristic feeling in a familiar package, you know, from a familiar brand, with, you know, just a little bit more of an established dealer network, all those types of things. You know, just a little bit easier probably to live with in many ways. And so, you know, I think that that's one of the things that the Volkswagen ID.4 really has going for it, and I'm very excited to hopefully try out the all-wheel drive version that will have more power, and hopefully that kind of addresses that whole performance thing, and also just the practicality, you know, for these snowbelt states that, you know, want to have all-wheel drive in their crossovers. But as a starting point, I think this is really great with the ID.4. They did a really good job with it. Aside from the few interior quirks and just, like I said, the few little imperfections, I still think this is a really good vehicle. I'm hoping that, you know, it's enough to convince some people to go into the electric thing and try it out, because I think it does make a lot of sense. And considering, you know, how most people do most of their driving, you could save a ton of money not paying for gas, especially these days with how much gas prices are. Save a ton of money, go for something like this, and it's just as good as, you know, any other gas crossover out there, aside from, you know, doing long road trips where it's a little bit longer. And most people these days fly for any road trip that's more than a few hours anyway, and a few hour road trip you could do in this without too much trouble. So, you know, I think that the ID.4 makes a lot of sense, and I think it's a solid entry. You know, I don't think it's better than the Mach-E. For me, I'd go for a Mach-E hands down over this. But if you have some opposition to the Mach-E and a Tesla doesn't interest you, definitely give this a spin and see what you think about it. I think they did a really good job on it overall. But yes, that's all of my thoughts here on the ID.4. Let me know your thoughts on it in the comments below. Huge thanks to Volkswagen for providing me here with the ID.4 to review for you guys today. And yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.